I do have slides, so I'll see how it goes. I'm going to share my screen, and you'll see me turning my head back and forth because I'm looking at a different screen. So hold on a second. Get Zoom up. And there's that share screen. Desktop 2, I think. There we go. Share. All right. Here we go. Play slideshow. Can y'all see my slide? Anybody? Can you hear me?
It looks good. Yeah, I can hear you and see the slides.
Okay.
Sorry, it would help if I unmute myself when I say yes. Sorry.
I had the same problem.
I just need one. So what does it look like? Do you see me too, or just my slide?
The video windows usually pop off to the side on Zoom. So we can see, I can see everybody's face in small window and then the slides on the big window. But there's actually a multi-window in Zoom. There's a preference to use multiple monitors. So you can actually have two large windows, one with people's faces and one with their presentation.
All right. Well, some of these slides I pulled or adapted from a presentation I did a few years ago at DevCon, talking about FileMaker and public health. And that was, of course, pre all this. This is going to talk about how we use FileMaker to deal with all the things we do in public health, and adapted our system to deal with COVID-19. Let's see if now the question is, there we go. So I work for the Oregon Health Authority. My official title is Electronic Disease Surveillance Project Manager. I have a little macro where I type my job and it just types all that out. And acute and communicable disease prevention is where we deal with outbreaks and managing any type of communicable disease, pertussis, measles, STD, HIV, all that good stuff. We tend to have kind of a morbid sense of humor in my office, but you know, all this stuff is obviously very serious. And you know, when we talk about the numbers here that we're going to talk about, you know, obviously these numbers represent real people who got sick and people who died. So not to bring everyone down on a Wednesday morning. But actually, the first thing I wanted to kind of show, one more, who am I? I don't know, some of you might have seen this stuff about portal sorting I did 10 years ago. That's my little FileMaker claim to fame. I had a couple slides about public health. We're kind of into surveillance in public health, just gathering lots and lots of data. But I'm just going to kind of blow over these because I want to get to what we did in FileMaker. And epidemiology is kind of what we do in the people that I work with are epidemiologists. So they are gathering data, trying to understand trends and solve outbreaks using the numbers that we gather in FileMaker. So I'm just going to switch over real quick if I can to not to Zoom. Here we go. So a lot of what we produce is now being made available to the public through Tableau. I don't know if any of you have gone to Oregon.gov and dug down in to see some of this stuff. But so Tableau is a great tool. I don't know if anybody here has used it, but it's really powerful for reporting, much more than you can do in FileMaker. So I wish I could take credit for some of this stuff. But the reason I'm showing it to you is because these numbers all come out of our systems. And so it's very, and they are viewable by the public, and they are what the governor relies on to make decisions about what's opening up in the state. So they are very important. And when our system doesn't work, then it kind of percolates up to the very highest levels in the state. And that's what we don't want. We want them to just, focus on getting the data and not on problems with our system. So these numbers are updated every day from the Opera system. Case counts, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where all this is leading, and that's kind of the important stuff that comes out of our system. Okay. Back to slides. So what we have now started off in a system called Orpheus, the Oregon Public Health Epi-user system, and all diseases would go into this single database. So we have layouts for different disease groups. Oh, I just remembered back when we had all disease groups on a single layout, and it had thousands of objects on the layout to accommodate all the different diseases. It was pretty amazing. We finally broke them out just to make the layouts a little more manageable and be able to customize them without worrying that what we did for one disease was going to affect another one.
Yeah, well,
so
going back before that, all the different diseases, the different departments, some of them had software and some of them didn't, and none of them talked to each other, and there was no statewide system. So like if you had two different counties each having a small outbreak of a couple of cases of disease like salmonella or E. coli or something like that, there wasn't any way for them to find out in a quick way if people in adjacent counties were also getting sick. So Orpheus started life, what, 11, 12 years ago now, to solve that problem. And then we added one disease group at a time, starting out with foodborne and then going to like STDs and HIV, and then adding pertussis and vaccine preventables. And then that's kind of how we got to that place where there was one gigantic layout with thousands of objects that did everything.
Right.
Continue with your story.
I should have said this system was actually initially built by Matt, and he worked on it and continues to work on it today as a contractor. And so it started life. What version was FileMaker 11 years ago? It was like version 9 or 10. And if you've ever built a system that started life 10 years ago, you know that it's not always easy to keep up with the times, and you'll end up with a lot of features in there that they were built because of the limitations of FileMaker at that time. And so this thing has really evolved and adapted over time. I mean, it's built data separated. So we have this interface file that has something like 500 layouts, which all had to be moved over to themes when we moved, to version 12 and onward. And so it's a big system, and we have a number of epidemiologists who also do some work on it. And like Matt said, every county was doing their own thing. Even today, like every state does their own thing. They have their own systems. I was sort of shocked when I started working here about 10 years ago that, there's really no unified public health reporting system. All the states do their own systems, and CDC, will ask for something, and everybody has to sort of adapt their systems to work with them. So there's a lot of work around integration of data silos. But this, has been really nice, partly because the epidemiologists, we call epis, can do some of their own work and build their own scripts and layouts. All right. So, just to look at the home screen here, you can see that my mouse doesn't even go over there. I was going to zoom in, but can I do it? No, it's not letting me. We have these portals on the home screen, and the way those work is when you click a checkbox for a certain disease or change county. I don't know if you can even really see. Why can't I move my pointer around on the slide screen? It only works if you have a laser pointer in a conference room, I guess. When you make a selection, it will run a script. It triggers a script, and will search the cases, bring back a list of case IDs, and put those in a global field. And so we use these global field-driven relations for these portals. And there are a bunch of portals on the screen. And when you first log into the system, it would refresh all those portals and do that when you navigate back to the home screen. If you had not been back in like 15 minutes, we at one point decided to add a timer to it. There's a reason I'm telling you all that. We'll get to that.
Yeah, and I maybe have a little bit further backstory that the portals aren't live like a normal portal would be. So if a user adds a new record, the portal doesn't refresh. We did that on purpose back then to make it faster, so that we just do kind of one query, get the data at that second. Wait, what did that say? You've got your special cup. Latte Larry's. Anyway, continue.
All right, so that's just a zoomed in view of what I was talking about. So like the number of contacts, it says 26. Well, like Matt said, that only refreshes when you make a selection here, or you navigate back to the main menu screen. All the users are assigned counties that they can see and diseases that they can see, and they sign a security oath to that effect when we bring them on board as an Orpheus user. And so the county users all access through Citrix. And so we have a Citrix server farm, and we have hundreds of FileMaker licenses. And at this point with Orpheus, last year we had just a live server and a dev server, a web server, and another sort of office production server for just miscellaneous stuff. So here you can see like they have their counties and their diseases that they can see. And so we have record level security here, where whenever you do a search, it says, okay, if this disease is Clackamas County and it's an STD, well, you don't have access to that county or that disease, so it's excluded whenever you do a search. So this puts some load on your searches. Going to come back to that. It keeps track of your recent files. And this is another cool thing about using FileMaker, is we can quickly stand up a module. So this is something we stood up when Ebola showed up a few years ago. And I put this slide because we actually had sort of the same model. I don't know if you call it a threat model, but when normally you only would show up in Orpheus if you actually have a case. So if you got tested at a lab and it came back negative, you would not go into our system. But with Ebola, we wanted to monitor people and not call them a case of Ebola, but so we call them a person under monitoring. And and then for 21 days, we would monitor every day if they had fever or whatever other symptoms. So I adapted this for coronavirus for the 14 days, and so we just call them a person under monitoring case, a PUM, not a case of coronavirus. I'll show you this little tool that I made. So this is one of the things early on. Come on, FileMaker. Early on in the pandemic, came up with the PUMRAT. This is the risk assessment tool for a person under monitoring. So it's just a little way of evaluating, what if somebody thinks they had a contact, were you on a cruise ship? Okay. Were you notified by Oregon Health Authority? No. Okay, there's no risk. Or let's say you had personal contact. Did you have close contact for a prolonged period? Yes. Oh, you are at high risk. Or if I say no. So this was just a tool where somebody who was dealing with a potential case could quickly evaluate, whether they need to proceed or what they should do about it. And this is just a sort of quick and dirty tool that I built. It's super simple under the hood. It just has a list of questions with a if yes, go to this ID, and if no, go to this ID. And if it's a 0 here, then it would go to the risk outcome. Super simple. The scripts just super minimal and simple. If only more stuff that I build could be like this. So that was just kind of a a nice little project to build, and did get some use out of it, but I'm not sure how much it's really being used today, I have to say.
It's like the exact opposite of the complexity of Orpheus.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's some a lot of times, I mean, you probably experience this with your own clients where they just really clamor for a certain feature, and then you build it, and then it ends up they really didn't care that much about it. So I'm not sure exactly how much that tool was used, but it was a good kind of learning experience. Okay.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
Can you go back one? I just have a question on that.
Back to the slide?
Yeah, just go back one slide. Oh no, I guess it was the program, that dude program that you were just on.
Oh, yeah.
So you didn't have to pay royalties to use the dude, did you?
Well, I don't actually have a picture of dude on here, do I?
No, I love it though. I love the reference.
Yeah, there's definitely some fans of that movie, but also it's a backronym, Directory of Useful Databases for Epidemiologists.
Yeah, I love it.
Orpheus is a backronym and Opera is a backronym, so there's lots of those around here.
It's covered under fair use, probably.
Probably. Well, I mean, we're only using the word, so. This is kind of an idea of how the data comes in and out of our system. Like I said, the integration is big for us. The thing is, like, public health is sort of an afterthought for most of these big medical record systems. They're built around billing insurance and tracking cases, medically, while somebody is hospitalized or whatever. So they're not always designed to to integrate with a public health system. They don't always have an API or something like that. So, you know, our Michelle Barber is our integration specialist here, has done an incredible job working with labs and hospitals and clinics to get these lab reports that come in. So the bulk of cases in Orpheus start off as an electronic lab report or ELR. They get pushed into this Rhapsody software that kind of routes them, and then we do and does, I think, some transformation, and then I think the bulk of the transformation is done in this ELR converter file. Well, it breaks out these messages. A lot of them are in this format called HL7 that's used in healthcare a lot. It's like a positional pipe separated data format. It's I don't think it's very fun, but it has its uses. And anyway, it busts these messages out into patient and lab and all these other things, and deals with the coding and stuff like that. But it's really difficult because sometimes a lab will come in, again, it's not well standardized. So a lab will come in and say, no disease, instead of like saying positive result, it'll say like no evidence of this, or patient does not have that, or, you know, it's like it can be in any format. And so there's been a lot of sort of case statements, let's say, to parse these things out and make sure they go to the right place. Let's see. Oh, and so then once a case comes in, we do a lot of direct interviewing. So there's this whole interview module that's built out. And so this was built to be very flexible. So we have this question template where you can just add a question as a record. And then when you ask it, each answer is a record in the answer table. So just keep that in mind. This is kind of the layout where you get into asking the questions, and then it steps you through one question at a time. And then later you can run reports on these questions. And we have tons of reports built. We're kind of moving towards pushing data into SQL, because then that could be used by Tableau. Actually, that's how Tableau is getting the data. It's pushed out into SQL file. And we are using SQL for actually the people who are doing mapping or geographical information system, GIS. They are pulling data through the FileMaker data API. And we have disease-specific reporting. This is another interface for pulling reports. So there's all that built in. Okay, so this is, we kind of got ahead of the slides, but the dude is our data directory of useful databases for epidemiologists. This is how it looked before COVID. It's just a launcher file that lets us kind of quickly deploy. You know, we can just put a file on the server, add a button here, and then be off and running. We do have an outbreaks database as well, which is used to summarize and report. So rather than report case by case, it's a summary of what happened in an outbreak. And this also was adapted for COVID. So just to give you a quick idea of like the type of outbreaks, you know, it might be a salmonella outbreak at a dairy, or a E. coli at a raw milk farm, where play a game of catch with bags of, you can imagine. Deer poop on strawberries was an E. coli outbreak. You can see more outbreaks at the outbreakmuseum.com. It's kind of a cool site with some of our exhibits, and you can actually visit that in person someday when the pandemic has calmed down. So we had all this stuff going on, And then in January of 2020, I get this email. I don't know if you can read it. It's from Dr. Paul Cieslak, sends out this message. CDC held a 50-state call about illnesses in Wuhan, which have recently been found to be caused by a novel coronavirus, which they're currently dubbing nCoV-2019. So it's 2019 is because that's the year that it appeared. Wasn't there some like conspiracy theory about it was like the number of viruses or I don't know.
Yeah, they thought it was the 19th version of the
Yeah,
coronavirus.
right. So it's just the year, and here's an email from me. I added a new disease called person under monitoring. That was January 30th. So then we're at this point we know, oh, we're going to have to deal with this. I don't. For some reason, there's a huge wave in the background. So we assemble this incident management team. There's like a sort of control room in the Portland State Office building, kind of like in what's that movie? I guess the movie was Outbreak, right? Where there's all these rows of computers and people sit around and try to figure out what they're going to do, and there's like incoming news feeds and all that stuff. It's just like that.
Just have a black screen right now, by the way.
Yeah.
There we go.
So yeah, that's when I created that PUM rat, and we had a contact tracing database in FileMaker that we had used for a measles outbreak. I think that was 2019 or 2020. I guess it was 2019. And they did use that at first for like 1,000 contacts or so, but then everything was moved to this Microsoft browser-based app called Arias, which is at-risk identification alerting system. Let's see. So a lot of this stuff, if you're interested, is available at oregon.gov/OHA. And let's see, here's Opera, here's Arias, at-risk identification alerting. So this is what they're using to do all the contact tracing. So I'm really glad that they found this. It's totally separate from FileMaker. We do export contacts from Opera, but mostly it's all handled here, and I don't really touch it or deal with it at all. I might have got ahead of myself a little bit again. So at first we put the COVID data into Orpheus, but we quickly found some issues. Basically, everything got really slow, partly because we jumped from about 50 users. I'm concurrent here. I'm using in the English sense, not the FileMaker licensing sense, just like 50 people at once using the system, just all day long. And we might go high as 70 or 80 on a given day, but 50 was a typical number. Okay, and then it became like 200 all day long or more. And things got really slow. I mean, if you remember the portals on the main screen, that refreshing that with doing finds all day long was slowing things down. We also had everybody went to working remotely. So, our Citrix users were already remote, but now they're not working in their office, they're working from home. So who knows what their internet speed is. We had to add more Citrix servers because they were adding more and more users. And we bought some more FileMaker licenses. I think we probably have over 1,000 now. We're also doing a ton of logging. So we when somebody makes a change, we log it to a separate file where we have the log table. So things were slowing way down, and we eventually built a performance logging system. So like every script had like a start performance log, and then at the end you stop the performance log, and this was actually eventually decided this was adding to the issue. So we just decided to stop the logging because we just wanted to like minimize all activity as much as we could.
Yeah, we added that to try to find where it was going slow, so we
Right.
could identify where we were going to spend our efforts to speed it up. And it
Is
was
this
super useful for that too.
Yeah,
was this
definitely.
before the
cool.
top call stats, or
No, this is like in scripts.
okay?
You know, putting a timer into every script basically, and within scripts too, you know, to see like where these bottlenecks were happening. Because I mean, top call.
Yeah, it's only going to
Yes.
show you like a find request
I mean,
or something within a script, right?
Top calls are kind of maddening because it'll say find request or something like that, but that could be a portal, like a portal, or it's a query. You know, like a portal is a query.
Yeah.
It's really hard to tease out what actually is going on from the top call stuff. It's useful for sure, but this was going to give us some real granularity, and at least that was our hope. And I think it helps somewhat. Like, so getting to these electronic lab reports. So what happened here is we used to only put positive cases into the database, but now the EPIs wanted to have the data for all the negative lab tests. So every lab test was getting put into Orpheus, positive and negative, and that was huge because 90% of them are negative. So we were adding this huge amount of data that they wouldn't have before, and the way the process works is that when the lab comes in, it would try to match it with a person. And again, because of our healthcare system, we don't have like a unique ID for every person. So it would have to, in order to avoid having duplicate people in the person table, it tries to match on their name, date of birth, address, or phone, and do like multiple iterations of a find. Like if it can't find them right away, it'll say, well, let's try a find this way, or maybe the first and last names got reversed, and I'll just iterate through these finds to try to make a match. And so if you can imagine, before COVID, we were getting 500 to 800 of these labs per day. So within a month, we had 10,000 a day, and peaked out around 50,000 a day. And now we're down to about 25,000 a day. Again, still 90% of these are negative. So that performance logging that I mentioned did point to this. There seemed to be a lot of instances where the find for the match might take a few minutes, but it was sporadic because a lot of times it would just take a second. So it was really hard to pin down exactly what was going on, and people were getting very, very frustrated. And like I said, we try to keep I don't know, low profile is the word, but we want to be recognized for the good work that we do, not for having issues with our processing. So this is where we decided we have to do something really drastic, and I've been kind of pushing for this. And so the result was OPERA, which is the Oregon Pandemic Emergency Reporting Application. And so what we did is we took a weekend, we built it up. It was kind of fun actually, because we got to obliterate a bunch of the system. There's all these parts. Like I said, we have layouts for all these different diseases. I could just delete those, delete. It feels really good to work on a file system where you can just like trim it down. So just to give an example, the interface file is something like 180 megs for Orpheus, and now it's like 80 megs. So it's, less than half the size. I think it's more like a third of the size. And then we took a weekend and we moved all the data. Now this is both the Orpheus to Opera and the outbreaks stuff. So all that moved over. So completely separated. So the advantages here is, with the different users, well, we could implement this different security model so that instead of, we basically eliminated the county security and the disease security. So now when you do a search in Opera, it doesn't have to limit it and, employ that security model. We think that's made a big difference in speed. But we're still struggled quite a bit because of the volume of data just so high. And so, and then at a certain point, let's see, that was July. Then we got to, in November, I think we started experiencing all kinds of problems and slowness, which we thought was the same stuff, but it turned out that we had some index corruption. And so again, we had to take the system down for a day and did a recover and data migration on the data file, and that did finally seem to clear all that up. But we, just the volume of data continued and continued. We did finally convince the EPIs that we do not need to have the negative cases, negative lab results in Opera as cases. So we trimmed all those out. Now things, I think, are in a fairly stable place. I had another example of the amount of data. So I don't know if I could show this on screen.
Tom, I think the best part of the story of like when we made a copy of Orpheus and adapted it to Opera, the amount of time from the decision to when we actually went live with Opera was how fast?
I don't remember. It's a blur.
3 weeks, 5 weeks, something like that. It was really, really fast.
Yeah.
I think it was about 3 weeks, if I recall.
Yeah, because the problems were really, the speed was really an issue. And we agreed that putting it onto making a copy of the file, simplifying the security, putting it on its own dedicated server, and then have not be front page news that was a huge failure. There was the fact that you didn't read about it or hear about it was made so many people happy because it was a huge undertaking and it was done very fast. That one part of it was a big success.
I mean, one thing to note is the user impact was drastic too. Before we forked it into Opera, all of the users were suffering very, very slow performance, and people were not able to do their jobs. And it got critical, and that's why we even decided to go this route. And it drastically improved everybody's performance. I mean, we had some hiccups, but for the most part, everything is smooth sailing now.
Yeah, it was a big relief. I was just going to mention these other numbers where I had for outbreaks. In 2019, we had 425 outbreaks. In 2020, we had 175. Now that's the non-COVID. In 2021, we've had 9 outbreaks. And the huge difference is all these respiratory diseases have gone down because everybody's wearing a mask and staying home. So there was a big difference, not just in COVID, but these other diseases were affected. So 175 non-COVID outbreaks in 2020, over 4,200 COVID outbreaks. So massive difference, 24 times. Now there's a little difference in the definition because probably 1,000 of those or so might only have one person, which they wouldn't have called an outbreak before, but they're putting that in outbreaks if they were in a nursing home or a school or that kind of setting and calling it an outbreak. But yeah, it's still like just a massive difference. And so that was a whole difference in, it used to be every outbreak had a person at the state reviewing it, and a person at the state had to generate the outbreak record. And now we're allowing some people at the counties to do a lot of that stuff just because the volume was such that we just didn't have the resources to have it all be done at the state. So this is what Dude looks like today with Orpheus stuff and Opera stuff. There's been a big clamor from the counties to give them a better data dictionary. So that's another project that came out of this. They had asked for it before, but now they were doing so much more reporting, or they wanted to do so much more reporting. They need a better data dictionary. What else should I show, Matt? Anybody have questions they want to ask about what we do or what we've done? I will say like I said, we had some issues with data corruption where since this data has been so critical, we got a lot of high-level support from our IT people that would have been not as easy to get. They made themselves much more available to us because of the importance of this data, and so that was great. And we even had Claris. We called for some support from Claris, and they were very helpful to us. But I think ultimately, at least my theory is that we had this data corruption that was killing us. Oh yeah, and the one thing I didn't mention, Matt did allude to it, is we moved things to different servers. So we had Opera on its own server, but what we did, I think it was in November, we actually moved the log file to its own server. So we now have an Opera server. We have a log server, a report server, and an Eddy server, which is where we have our ELR and ECR processing files.
Quick question. How did you identify that it was an index corruption at its root when we were having those corruption issues?
I'm thinking back now.
Was it a
oh, well, it
test
was
restore?
because I recovered the file. Yeah. So I took a copy. I was just showing you the size of these files. That's not megabytes here. This is gigabytes. We were having so many issues that I thought, well, I'll see what I can see, So the data file itself was like 8 gigs at that time. So that's not these files. That's actually so the Opera data file, it's about 9 gigabytes now. So it took a while to run a recover on that file, but then it comes, when you recover, it comes back with a report. Well, it logs everything it does. So you'll see where it's saying, okay, I recovered this library, and I recovered these themes, and I recovered this and that and that. It's very verbose. And so there were a couple of things that popped out to me there. And so, it said I repaired this and that. And and file, you know how FileMaker recommends that you don't ever use a recovered file, but you know, you don't always have a choice whether or not to do. And I think most of us may or may not admit to using recovered files. I've done it many times over the years and had no issues that I'm aware of. So so we did end up recovering the file, and then I think just to be safe, I did do a clone of. No, I did use it. I cloned the recovered file, and then I migrated data from the original file into there and had it rebuild the indexes. So, you know, the data migration tool can be super fast if you don't rebuild the indexes, because it's just doing like a bit level copy of the data. But when you rebuild the indexes, it's very time intensive, and it took something like 6 or 8 hours to migrate all that data. It took all day, but afterwards it was just sort of like magic. Everything started working again. So we had another index that was corrupted, which was very scary, was the attachments. So we have a lot of data put into container fields, and we use secure storage. And you know, if your file is lost or whatever, your container data is going to be lost. Like there's going to be no way to get to that. So so yeah, we were having some weird issues with that at one point, but we're able to, with that recovery, like all issues were solved. So we're really happy now with this, the way we've broken out the servers, I think has, you know, set us up well for future development. And one issue we came up against recently was the way we work with data separation. Every 2 weeks, I just swap out the interface. I do this for Orpheus and Opera, take the interface, close the file on the dev server and live server, and then I just drag it over there, fire it back up. It's great, but the file references became an issue, because before, I don't know if I can show this. Let's see. I can just show you in Dude. So, you know, you'll have a file path that looks like this, file Orpheus, or in the case of log here, Orpheus log. So I could put, I could say file, you can have multiple lines, right? File Orpheus. So you could have 2 files like that. And when I swap the interface out, we'll first try to find the first file in the list. If it can't find it, it'll look for the next file on the list.
On the
No
local
problem.
server.
Right, because these are local files. So if I have this, if the file's hosted on dev, it'll say, where's Orpheus log? It's not here. Oh, here's Orpheus dev log. I'm good to go. But if that second path is a network reference, an FM net, then it can potentially find it. And so we ran up against this issue where if you opened Opera first, and then it would open the Opera live log file on this other server. Then when you open dev, you know, even though there was a local dev path, it would say, oh, well, that one of these files in the path that's listed is already open, so I'm good. And and I tried to get around this by using a $, you know, to set with a startup script the path, but for some reason it did the same thing. I don't know if anybody's ever encountered this, but I would love a solution to this, if any of that made sense.
Does anyone use that feature that came out a few years ago of using paths through variables?
I did set up a system that way, where basically it was an office that had, or it was a company that had 2 offices. And so we gave them 1 interface file and 2 data files, 1 for each office. So they didn't share data, but they did share an interface. And it was a little tricky to get it working because you had to have this sort of like a launcher where they chose what office. Well, first they would log in to this login file, and depending on what office they worked at, it would log them into one or the other. But there were some administrators who were able to log into both. And if they could log into both, then it would give them the choice, like which office did you want to look at the data for? And you'd click a button and then it would load up that global variable and then log you in. But it was definitely not as simple or straightforward as you might expect to get it to work.
We had to have, there had to be a loader file before you connected to the initial interface file or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you instantiated the wrong global variable, then you suddenly were stuck in the wrong data file and you'd have to close back out everything and relog in. So there was like this loader. You would log into a file that didn't have a connection to that global variable data file. And then you would choose which one you, or scripting would basically choose which data file to load, and then it would log you in and load the correct data file.
Right, but it can't, it works fine under the right circumstances, right? It's just that you can't switch. One thing is that you can't switch references during a session. You have to sort of start over again.
Yeah, exactly. You can't switch on the fly.
And I don't think that they took into account this sort of situation where you might have 2 versions of the file open at the same time.
Yeah.
And that it could look for that same path. So I think we're just sort of a weird use case. Although I mean, a lot of people do data separation and they're going to have potentially the live file and the dev file open at the same time. So I don't think it would be that far-fetched for this to have come up before. And I am doing it at the very, it's the very first thing that happens during the startup script.
You know, this would
but by that
be
point the
something
file is open and it'll have to have resolved the references. I
That's
think
what I
that's
think
why we
is
had to do it
happening.
in a file before the interface file opened.
Exactly. I think this would be
guess
something
so.
that you would want to do in, for example, inside of Dude, where
But
somebody goes, I want to log into dev, and then inside of the Dude launcher file, it goes, all right, they're choosing dev, so load up this data file.
I know, but it has to set the global variable in the interface file. So the interface file has to be open.
Right.
So global variables are file specific.
I think there was I think you have to have like an intermediary file that loads the interface after the global variable has been loaded or something like that. Launches, I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was like a opener file, and there was this intermediary file, and then you launch your interface and your data file. And you'd have to like back out through them to close it and go to the other one.
Tim or Mike, anybody else on the call? Have you guys dealt with this issue? I pick you guys out because you're known to be nerdy.
Well, I think the real question is when do the external data sources get loaded, right? Do they get loaded like right as the file opens, or does it get loaded when it actually has to access that external data source, right?
Right. And so what my assumption was, because this is the screen that you land on when the file opens, there's no fields or anything on this screen.
So there's no
we-
references to the external data sources.
Not
Right.
on this layout.
Right,
not on
such
this
that it shouldn't
layout.
actually open them.
So the only thing that I could think of was that,
Because
that
I always thought
because-
it was accessing it when you have something accessing the external file.
me too, me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, I don't
Because-
think so. I think when the script opens, I think, because I'm remembering now that we're talking about it in more detail, that a discovery that that David and I and one other developer we had at AppWorks at the time made, which is that like as soon as you open up a script, it loads the whole script. And before it even starts executing the first line of code, it has to resolve all the file references in that script.
Oh, Matt, that's a good thought. Because maybe what I could do is
A
Like
shorter
this-
startup script.
the startup script could just run this, and then all this stuff could be moved to a subscript.
Yeah, something like that would be worth trying. But I think we even
Yeah.
found that didn't
Well, no,
work.
that makes sense because there's a reference to the external data source in the script, so it would
Right.
have to
Good idea.
open it. Yeah.
I think that's worth a try, Matt.
Yeah, try that. And if that fails, the next thing I think to try would be an opener file that opens before Opera opens. And the opener file says, oh, you're getting into dev or live. And then it passes the parameters of the file pass to
To a set global, yeah, to the set
the
global
interface. Yeah, something like that. And then at that point, it knows it immediately before anything else is executing. And it sets those paths so that the very, very first time it executes it, whatever it's doing, it has it there before it loads a layout or runs a script or anything.
I'm skeptical about the order of operations there. I think ultimately it still has to open and run a script.
Yeah, but you are. But the script that you're
Yeah.
running is not going to reference the external data source until the subscript, right? So you'd be passing the path, the global variable path, to a script that all it does is set the global variable and then run your subscript.
But it has to.
Yeah, it does have to still execute it. You're right. That worked.
It
though.
has
I
to
mean, that
execute.
was,
Yeah, the interface file has to set the variable.
yeah, it would.
Can't be set from outside.
Yeah,
So I
so
don't-
whether you set them with hard coding it or set them some other way, it does seem like that would be the thing.
I think it's a good
So-
thought that it's the file reference in the script they're doing it. But my only other thought was that even though there's nothing here that somehow, nothing on the layout that somehow it still had to like resolve the relationships from that layout at least, which is connected to a lot of stuff.
Oh, hey, show the relationship graph.
Oh, but you said yourself, Tom, that it was running that script that referenced the external data source, right?
Yeah, That
Yeah,
script does do that.
There's an
that-
easy way to test that. Just take out that script and see if it's still, and you know what I mean? There's a really easy way to test that. Like put that all in a different script and then just set it, and then you can just go into the external data
God.
sources and see
Oh,
where it is. Just
we
go in the
can
data
see it.
viewer.
If you go down to
Holy
2%, 2% magnification, you can reach
What
the
the
end.
hell is that?
this is the graph. It's highly legible, right?
Yeah. This is it looks like something on microfiche. Remember the microfiche things that used to go to the library and
No, none of us is old enough to remember that.
yeah, I know. Matt. Aren't you retired now, Matt? What's going on? Speaking of being old.
I know. Thanks for that.
Yeah, the graph is something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
The thing that I love most about this graph is the really gigantic table occurrence group for case, which has hundreds of table occurrences connected to it. That's way up. It's like the second one from the top. Is extremely performant. So all the things that I've read about, using a spider graph or using this technique or trying to keep it simple are straight up wrong, because it's basically sort of like, trying to recover milliseconds here and there. But when you load a record, that's the one right there, the main cases center. When you load a record in this table and you'll have a layout with huge complexity, that record loads in a very small fraction of a second, even with all this complexity on it. So my lesson was that I took away is you can have a huge amount of complexity and it does not cause you problems as long as you're following other best practices in your design. Like not showing a huge number of unstored calculations or any. You can have a very complex graph and still have a very fast solution.
Yeah, are you referring to the number of table occurrences?
Yes.
Actually, yeah, I never found that to be true either. I've always wondered that because of the sessions that I saw at the multiple dev cons, it was like, I've never experienced this. I don't know why you guys are going. It's like you're bending over backwards to do these to get around table occurrences when it's like
academic.
Hansa pointed out it's not the number of occurrences, it's the hops. And so if you got good anchor Louis schema, then you get a good performer no matter how many table occurrences you're using.
Yeah, and I think it potentially slows down the initial load of the file.
And even that's not that bad.
Yeah, it just depends, but these
Yeah.
days most people have a pretty good network.
Yeah, plus this particular solution is deployed on Citrix. So the connection between the Citrix session and the FileMaker server is, gigabit or maybe faster.
Yeah.
So we just have a few minutes left.
You know what though? Some people are on VPN.
Oh, that's true.
I think those are some of the people who had issues with that file path not resolving.
And the multi-server thing, I think, is the other complexity of that one. The solution that David was talking about where we successfully deployed that variable path was on one server.
Mm. Yeah.
Tom, this was great. I love the whole soup to nuts story of how this thing came about. I'm really glad we didn't get into too much detail about the very dark days of FileMaker Server 19.1 and the couple of week period where we were having crashes very frequently. And that had a really good outcome when we upgraded to Server 19.2. And have we had any crashes since then?
It's been pretty stable. Actually, we were having some issues with the those huge ELR converter and ECR converter files.
Yeah, you saw that one.
It, guys.
What was that, Kim?
Way to jinx it.
Hey, I did knock wood.
Well, the problem is just that
You said it out loud.
If there's any glitch and the server has to restart unexpectedly, your files are going to run a consistency check when they open, when the server rehosts those files. And that's not so bad, but if they're large files, then that
How long does that take?
It takes hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, on a 200 gigabyte file. Yeah.
It takes about, in my experience with this system, it goes about a gigabyte a minute. So 60 gig file is going to take an hour. And
I think it's worth mentioning that when we were having those crashes with server 19.1, we reached out to Claris and we were like, we're having an emergency situation. We need your help. And they got their engineers on board. They debugged it with us. We sent them log records and crash logs, and they repaired it essentially and gave us, a newer version, sort of a custom version of FileMaker Server that fixed the problem. So that was, that was actually great that we had their support.
Yeah, for sure. We did have, and we would send them,
We even send them a full suite of files, and they did diagnosis
Yeah.
right
Oh
in the
yeah,
actual
dump files.
clone.
Yeah, it took a little while. I had to purge a bunch of stuff out of them, but when your server crashes, it creates these dumps, DMP files, and which they're not really readable, and so they have some tool for analyzing those. Yeah, they were helpful for sure. What was that one thing I was going to say? But yeah, I learned way more about server maintenance than I wanted to know.
Yeah.
We have Matt's colleague Carl is super helpful when it
Is he
comes to
still on?
server
He was
stuff.
on earlier. Oh yeah, yeah, Carl's still on the call here.
I'm here.
He built a little server monitoring tool for us so we ended up getting one of the IT guys to feed server stats to Carl and his file, and then that it's like in real-time monitoring of our system that sends us alerts.
Yeah, that system actually was phenomenal because he noticed, Carl noticed that there was certain things that were indicators before the server was going to crash.
Right.
So he could look at the logs and determine in real time that the server, there was a setup for a crash coming within 40 minutes or so. And if we took action during that 40 minutes, that we could actually kick the users off, close the file, and prevent the crash. And then thus prevent the multi-hour hard server reboot. So that was amazing. I would not have thought that was possible until he actually did it.
Was that something that you guys did with like Zabbix or something like that? Or what did you guys use to analyze the log files?
We can't talk about it. No, I'm just kidding. Carl, I would love it if you could talk about what you did.
We use Zabbix for all our cloud hosted servers, but Zabbix is not an option in the in the state data center. So we had to build our own solution.
And what is it that you actually found? What was the indicator?
It's usually an increased amount of remote calls per second, and the IOPS, the read IOPS on the hard drive where the FileMaker database files are stored, it increases also quickly, along with a third thing, but it's been a long time. I don't remember it.
Yeah, that was like January, I think, right?
Yeah.
We did get access to this Spotlight, which is sort of a souped up perfmon for Windows servers.
Mm-hmm.
And so here you could look at CPU or memory use. What I was doing was going into the server admin console a lot and looking at the memory just to see if it was going over a certain level. And like I told our IT guys, well, usually the memory use of this server is around 20%, and if it goes over 25, I start to get worried because it's like a potential memory leak that's running away. And they would say, well, if it's not using 100% of the server, what are you worrying about? I just had to convince them that this is in fact an issue. I mean, it's a symptom that
right, it's an indicator.
It doesn't usually use all that much memory. And we also found out that we have this Commvault backup system here, and that was just pegging the memory of the servers every night and taking a long time too. And we never did get a certain answer whether it was supposed to exclude the live file folders, but there was some debate about whether it had actually been excluding them.
Yeah,
and
that can be disastrous.
Yeah, it was also running during the day. It wasn't actually doing a backup, but it was using CPU cycles. Because
it was taking so long, the backup that started at night would carry over into the day. And the thing is that when FileMaker does a daily backup, it uses these hard links, right? So that if a file hasn't changed, or especially like all the hundreds of megabytes of container data, it's just a hard link. It's not actually creating a duplicate copy of those every night. But as far as Commvault is concerned, each of those daily backups is a whole new set of files. And so it's trying to back up this mass amount of data. And recently they switched over to this, I can't remember the name of the backup, but it's a snapshot system that just pauses the whole server for a second, takes a snapshot, and then you can kind of get on with your day, and all that backup happens in a separate service. So
Is it Veeam?
what was it?
Veeam?
Doesn't ring a
It's
bell.
a real
So-
popular one for snapshotting.
Yeah.
It works really well.
We had this scheduled to go till right now to 11:15. I want to respect everyone's time. Tom, I don't know if you're willing to stick around for a few more minutes if there's any other questions. But at this point, I would just officially say thank you very much for this great presentation, and thanks for everyone for attending. We'll keep having good content like this at upcoming meetings.
Excellent. Actually, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you guys
really?
who worked on this. Just because I know for myself,
Oh,
living in
really?
the area,
You must have done a lot of work on it.
yeah, I was constantly checking the data and where we were going as far as cases and stuff on the website all the time. So thanks, guys.
Yeah, you and everyone else.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I actually had some XKCD cartoons too. What was the one? Oh yeah. This is like we had so many people becoming epidemiologists during the pandemic. The armchair epidemiology. Yeah, it was
That'll be funny.
things
Yeah.
were messy,
Yeah.
and people were
Yeah.
really hungering for these numbers for
We gotta come.
reliable data. Anyway, yeah, if anybody ever has questions and wants to contact me, you can, I don't know, do it through Meetup, I guess.
Because people can't have your email, that's for sure.
I'm easy to find. Well, Tom at fitchandfitch.com is good, or Thomas W. Fitch at state.or.us. But yeah, always happy to answer questions about this stuff or talk about it. It's just never-ending work.
Thanks again, Tom. I gotta bolt.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye. Thank
See ya.
you.
Bye.